The snow fell in thick sheets across the Wyoming wilderness, turning the world into a white tomb, and Josephine Edwards knew she was going to die out here with her unborn child still inside her. She stumbled through the drifts that reached past her knees, her worn boots offering little protection against the biting cold that seemed to cut straight through to her bones. Her cloak, threadbare and soaked through, clung to her swollen belly as she pressed forward with no destination in mind, except away from the town that had cast her out. Laramie had been her home for 6 months before everything fell apart. She had arrived there in the summer of 1878 with Thomas, the man who had promised her the world and delivered nothing but shame. He had swept her off her feet in Chicago, painted pictures of a life together out west, where they would build something beautiful. She had believed every word, had given herself to him completely, had trusted in his promises of marriage. When she discovered the pregnancy, Thomas had disappeared in the night, taking what little money she had saved and leaving behind only a note that said he was not ready to be a father. The town had no sympathy for a woman in her condition without a husband. The boarding house owner had given her 3 days to leave. The general store refused her credit. Even the church, where she had sought counsel and comfort, had turned her away with stern lectures about sin and consequences. So she had packed what few belongings she could carry and set out on foot, hoping to reach the next town before the early winter storm hit. She had been foolish to hope. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed into the snow, her breath coming in ragged gasps that sent white clouds into the frozen air. The baby kicked inside her, a reminder that she was not alone even if she was abandoned. She pressed her hand to her belly and whispered an apology to the life she had brought into such terrible circumstances. The wind howled around her, drowning out her words, and the snow continued to fall with merciless efficiency. This was how it would end then. Frozen in the wilderness, her dreams buried beneath the white powder that was already beginning to cover her dark cloak. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother back in Illinois, who had died when Josephine was only 15. At least she would see her again soon. The sound of hoofbeats broke through her fading consciousness. "Good God in heaven," a man's voice said, rough and startled. Strong hands gripped her shoulders and turned her over. She forced her eyes open to see a face hovering above her, weathered and tanned by years under the sun, with deep brown eyes that held both surprise and concern. Snow clung to his dark beard and the brim of his hat. "Can you hear me?" he asked, his voice cutting through the storm. She tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering too hard. He did not wait for an answer. In one smooth motion, he lifted her from the snow as though she weighed nothing despite her pregnant state. She felt herself being settled onto a horse, felt his body press against her back as he mounted behind her, one arm wrapped securely around her middle to hold her in place. "Stay with me now," he said into her ear. "My cabin is not far." She drifted in and out of awareness during the ride. The world became a blur of white and cold, punctuated by the steady rhythm of the horse's movement, and the warmth of the man's body shielding her from the worst of the wind. She registered vague impressions of trees passing by, of the horse being guided with expert hands, of a voice speaking low and steady to keep her conscious. "Almost there. You are going to be fine. Stay awake for me." Then there was a building, modest and solid, emerging from the snow like salvation. He dismounted and pulled her down after him, carrying her to the door and kicking it open. The warmth inside hit her like a wave and she gasped, her frozen skin burning with the sudden temperature change. He set her down in a chair near the fireplace and immediately began building up the fire from the embers that still glowed in the hearth. Within minutes, flames were crackling and throwing heat into the small space. She sat shivering violently as he stripped off her wet cloak and wrapped her in thick blankets that smelled of wood smoke and leather. "We need to get you out of these wet clothes," he said, his tone purely practical. "I will turn my back. There is a dry shirt on the bed you can put on." She nodded, unable to form words yet. He turned away and she struggled with numb fingers to remove her sodden dress and undergarments. The effort exhausted her, but eventually she managed to pull on the shirt he had indicated, a warm flannel that hung to her knees and smelled like him. She wrapped the blankets around herself again and he turned back, keeping his eyes respectfully on her face. "Better?" he asked. "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse. "Thank you." He nodded and moved to the stove where he began heating water in a kettle. "I am Quinn Montgomery. This is my homestead about 10 miles north of Laramie. Josephine Edwards." She pulled the blankets tighter. "I am sorry to impose on you like this. No imposition in saving a life." He glanced at her, his gaze dropping briefly to her swollen belly before returning to her face. "Though I am curious what you were doing out in a storm like this in your condition." The kindness in his voice nearly undid her. Tears sprang to her eyes and she looked away, ashamed of her weakness. "I had nowhere else to go." He was quiet for a moment, processing this. The kettle began to whistle and he poured hot water into a cup, adding what looked like tea leaves and honey. He brought it to her and she accepted it gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. "Drink slowly," he advised. "Your body needs to warm up gradually." She obeyed, taking small sips of the sweet tea. The warmth spread through her chest and belly, and gradually the violent shivering subsided. He pulled up another chair and sat across from her, removing his snow-covered hat and coat. She got her first good look at him in the firelight. He was perhaps 30 years old, lean and strong in the way of men who worked hard for their living. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his beard was neatly trimmed. His face was honest and open, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He watched her with an expression of concern and something else she could not quite identify. "How far along are you?" he asked gently. 7 months, I think." She placed a hand on her belly, perhaps closer to 8. "That is too far to be traveling alone, especially in winter." His tone held no judgment, only statement of fact. "I know." She took another sip of tea. "I did not have a choice. There is always a choice. Not for women like me." The bitterness crept into her voice despite her efforts to contain it. Not for women who trusted the wrong man and found themselves in a condition that society deems unforgivable. His expression softened. "I see." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the wind howling outside. Josephine felt herself beginning to thaw, both physically and emotionally. The warmth of the cabin, the safety of solid walls around her, the presence of another human being who had shown her unexpected kindness, all of it combined to create the first moment of peace she had experienced in months. "You can stay here tonight," Quinn said finally. "The storm will not let up until morning at the earliest. You can take the bed. I will sleep by the fire." "I cannot take your bed," she protested. "You can and you will." His tone left no room for argument. "You need proper rest. Tomorrow we can figure out what to do next." She was too exhausted to argue further. She finished her tea and he helped her to the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable with its thick mattress and heavy quilts. She sank into it with a grateful sigh, her aching body finally able to relax. Quinn returned to the fire, and she watched him through heavy eyelids as he prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork. "You should eat something," he said, bringing her a plate. She had not realized how hungry she was until the food was in front of her. She ate ravenously, not caring about manners or propriety. He watched her with satisfaction and brought her more when she finished the first portion. Only when she was completely full did she lean back against the pillows. "Thank you," she said softly. "I do not know how I can ever repay you." "No repayment necessary." He took her empty plate. "Get some rest now." She closed her eyes and sleep claimed her almost immediately, deep and dreamless. When she woke, pale morning light was filtering through the window and the storm had finally passed. She could hear Quinn moving around outside, tending to his horse. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore but vastly improved from the night before. The cabin looked different in daylight. It was small but well built. One room with a sleeping area partitioned off by a curtain, a kitchen area with a cast iron stove, and a living area with the fireplace and a few simple chairs. Everything was neat and orderly, the mark of a man who lived alone and took pride in his space. A rifle hung over the door and various tools lined one wall. Through the window she could see a barn and a small corral with a few horses. Quinn came back inside, stamping snow off his boots. He saw she was awake and gave her a small smile. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Much better." She pulled the blankets up, suddenly aware she was still wearing only his shirt. "My clothes. I hung them to dry by the fire, should be ready soon." He moved to the stove and began preparing breakfast. "I have been thinking about your situation." Her heart sank. Here it came, the part where he told her she needed to leave. "I understand. I will be on my way as soon as possible." He turned to look at her, surprise evident on his face. "That is not what I meant. Where exactly were you planning to go?" "I thought I might try the next town. Perhaps Fort Collins or Cheyenne." "That is days of travel, and the snow has made the roads nearly impassable. You would never make it on foot." He cracked eggs into a pan. "Even if you did, what then? No town is going to be more welcoming to an unmarried woman with a baby than Laramie was." "What else can I do?" She hated the helplessness in her own voice. He was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on the eggs. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, as though he was testing each word before releasing it. "You could stay here. I told you I have no way to repay you. I am not asking for repayment." He plated the eggs along with some bread and brought her a portion. "This is a working ranch. I run cattle, break horses, take on whatever work I can get. It is not much, but it is a living. I could use help around the place. You could earn your keep that way, at least until after the baby comes." She stared at him, not daring to hope. "You would let me stay, just like that, just like that." He sat down with his own plate. "Though I admit there is a complication." Her hope wavered. "What kind of complication?" "People talk. If you are living here unmarried, especially with a baby on the way, it will cause problems. For both of us, but especially for you and the child." He met her eyes steadily. "The child would be born without a father's name. That will follow him or her through life, make everything harder." "I am aware," she said quietly, "so I have a solution if you are willing to hear it." He set down his fork and leaned forward. "We could marry. In name only, if that is what you want. Give the child legitimacy, give you protection. People would assume the baby is mine, and no one would question it." Josephine felt her breath catch in her throat. "You would do that? Marry a complete stranger to save her reputation?" "That child deserves my name too, if it means protecting them from a world that punishes children for their parents' mistakes." His voice was firm, his expression serious. "I know what it is like to be judged for things beyond your control. I would not wish that on an innocent baby." She set down her untouched plate, her hands trembling. "Why would you do this for me? You do not know anything about me. I know you were willing to die in a snowstorm rather than give up your child. I know you have courage and strength. That is enough." He paused. "I am not offering a love match, Josephine. I am offering a practical solution to a difficult problem. If you want to leave after the baby is born and old enough to travel, we can arrange an annulment or divorce. But at least the child will have a name and a birth certificate that says they are legitimate. She looked down at her belly, at the child growing inside her who had done nothing to deserve the stigma that awaited them. Quinn was right. Without a father's name, her baby would face discrimination and hardship at every turn. Doors would be closed, opportunities denied, all because of choices Josephine had made. "What about you?" she asked. "What do you get out of this arrangement?" he shrugged. "Company, I suppose. Help around the ranch. It gets lonely out here during the winter, and maybe the satisfaction of knowing I did something decent in a world that does not always reward decency." She studied his face, looking for any sign of ulterior motives or hidden intentions. She found only honesty and a quiet determination. This man, this stranger who had saved her life, was offering her salvation with no strings attached. "You truly mean it," she said softly. "You would marry me just to give my child your name." "I truly mean it." Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude and relief rather than despair. "Then yes, yes, I will marry you," he nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Good. We can ride into Laramie in a few days when the roads are clearer. Find a preacher and make it legal. The people in Laramie will talk. They know I was alone when I arrived. Let them talk. We will say we met before, that you came here to be with me but got caught in the storm. No one can prove otherwise." He returned his attention to his breakfast. "Eat. You need to keep your strength up." She picked up her fork and began eating, her mind whirling with the sudden turn her life had taken. Yesterday she had been prepared to die. Today she was planning a marriage to a man whose last name she had only learned hours ago. It should have felt more frightening than it did. Instead, she felt only a cautious hope beginning to bloom in her chest. Over the next few days, Josephine settled into life at the Montgomery ranch. The cabin was small but comfortable, and Quinn proved to be a considerate housemate. True to his word, he slept by the fire while she took the bed. He woke early each morning to tend the animals and see to the ranch work, then came back to prepare breakfast. She helped as much as her condition allowed, cooking meals and tidying the cabin while he worked outside. They talked during those days, getting to know each other in the way two people might before deciding to spend their lives together, except they had already agreed to marriage. She learned that he had come west from Missouri 5 years earlier, seeking to build something of his own after his parents died. He had worked as a ranch hand and cowboy, saving every penny until he could buy this land and start his own operation. It was small, just enough cattle to provide a modest income, but it was his and he was proud of it. "I always wanted land of my own," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "My father was a sharecropper, never owned anything in his life, worked himself to death making other men rich. I swore I would not end up the same way." "You have done well for yourself," she said, looking around the cabin. "This is a good life you have built. It could be better, lonelier than I expected sometimes." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I thought about courting a woman from town, but I never seemed to find the time. The ranch takes most of my energy." "Will you regret tying yourself to me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "You could find someone else, someone without complications." He looked at her steadily. "I do not make promises I regret. When I give my word, I keep it." She believed him. In the few days she had known Quinn Montgomery, he had proven himself to be a man of integrity and honor. He was kind without being soft, strong without being cruel. He treated her with respect and consideration, never pushing beyond the boundaries they had established. She found herself grateful for his presence in a way that went beyond simple survival. On the fourth day, The sun came out and the roads became passable again. Quinn hitched up his wagon and helped Josephine climb onto the seat beside him. Her dress had dried and she wore it again, along with her cloak, which was still slightly damp but serviceable. He had given her a thick wool blanket to wrap around herself for extra warmth. The ride to Laramie took most of the morning. The town was larger than she had expected, with a main street lined with businesses and several side streets with houses and other buildings. The Transcontinental Railroad ran through here, bringing commerce and travelers from across the country. It was a town on the rise, full of opportunity for those who could seize it. Quinn guided the wagon to the church at the end of Main Street, a white wooden building with a modest steeple. He helped her down and they walked inside together, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The interior was simple but well maintained, with rows of wooden pews and a plain altar at the front. A man emerged from a side door, middle-aged with kind eyes and graying hair. He wore the simple black garb of a minister and greeted them with a warm smile. "Good morning. I am Reverend Patterson. How can I help you folks? We would like to be married," Quinn said, his hand resting lightly on Josephine's back. "Today, if possible." The Reverend's eyes moved to Josephine's obvious pregnancy and his expression flickered with understanding. "I see. Do you have witnesses?" "We were hoping you might know someone who could serve," Quinn replied. "I can fetch my wife and the church secretary. That should suffice." He paused. "This is rather sudden. Are you both certain this is what you want?" "We are certain," Josephine said, speaking up for the first time. She met the Reverend's gaze without flinching. "I know what this looks like, Reverend, but Quinn is a good man who is doing a noble thing. We are both entering this marriage with our eyes open." The Reverend studied them for a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well. Let me gather the witnesses. It will take just a few minutes." He disappeared through the side door and returned shortly with two women, one elderly and one younger. They looked at Josephine and Quinn with curiosity but no judgment. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike, the Reverend reading from his prayer book while they repeated the vows. Quinn had procured a simple gold band from somewhere, slipping it onto her finger when prompted. His hands were warm and steady, his voice clear as he promised to honor and cherish her. When it came time for her vows, Josephine found herself speaking with more conviction than she had expected. Whatever the circumstances that had brought them together, she meant the words she was saying. She would be a good wife to this man who had saved her life and given her child a future. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Patterson said. "You may kiss your bride." Quinn hesitated, his eyes meeting hers in silent question. She gave a small nod and he leaned in, pressing a chaste kiss to her lips. It was brief and respectful, but she felt warmth spread through her at the contact. This was her husband now, this stranger who had become her salvation. They signed the marriage certificate with the witnesses watching, making it legal and binding. Quinn paid the Reverend, and they walked back out into the cold December air as man and wife. He helped her back onto the wagon and they rode through town, stopping at the general store to pick up some supplies. The shopkeeper, a rotund man with a large mustache, greeted Quinn warmly. "Montgomery, good to see you. Heard you got yourself hitched. Congratulations." News traveled fast in small towns. Quinn accepted the congratulations with grace, introducing Josephine as his wife. She saw curious glances directed at her belly, saw the calculations happening behind eyes as people tried to figure out how far along she was, and whether Quinn was the father. She held her head high and smiled, playing the part of a happy bride. As they loaded the wagon with flour, coffee, dried beans, and other staples, a woman approached them. She was young and pretty, with blonde hair and blue eyes, and she wore an expression of barely concealed anger. "Quinn Montgomery," she said, her voice sharp. "I heard the rumor, but I could not believe it was true. You got married without telling anyone." Quinn's expression remained neutral. "Hello, Lily. Yes, Josephine and I were married this morning. How long have you been courting?" "I have not seen her around town." Lily's gaze swept over Josephine with undisguised hostility. "We met last summer when she passed through on her way to visit family," Quinn said smoothly. "We corresponded by letter and decided to marry. She arrived a few days ago." It was the story they had agreed upon, simple and difficult to disprove. Lily clearly did not believe it, but she had no proof to challenge it. "I see. How convenient." "Lily, this is my wife, Josephine. Josephine, this is Lily Harper. Her father owns the feed store." Josephine extended her hand. "Pleased to meet you." Lily ignored the offered hand. "I hope you know what you are getting into. Ranch life is hard, especially for someone who does not look like they have worked a day in their life." "I am sure I will manage," Josephine replied coolly. Lily turned her attention back to Quinn. "You could have done better. You should have waited." "I am perfectly happy with my choice," Quinn said, his voice firm. "Now if you will excuse us, we have supplies to load." He took Josephine's arm and guided her away. They finished loading the wagon in silence and climbed back onto the seat. As Quinn drove them out of town, Josephine finally spoke. She seemed quite upset about our marriage. "Lily has had expectations that I never encouraged," Quinn admitted. "Her father is wealthy and she is used to getting what she wants. She decided some time ago that I would make a suitable husband. Because you own land." "Because I own land," he confirmed. "I have been avoiding her efforts at courtship for over a year now. This should finally make my position clear." Josephine felt a strange flutter in her chest that might have been jealousy, which was ridiculous given the nature of their arrangement. Still, something about seeing another woman stake a claim on Quinn had stirred unexpected feelings. The ride back to the ranch was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The sun was beginning to set by the time they arrived, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. Quinn helped her down from the wagon and began unloading the supplies while she went inside to start dinner. That evening, as they sat by the fire eating the stew she had prepared, Josephine felt the weight of what they had done settling over her. She was married now, bound to this man by law and ceremony. The child inside her kicked and she placed a hand on her belly, feeling the life moving within her. "You want to know something?" she said quietly. Quinn looked up from his bowl. "What is that?" "I have not felt it move this much in weeks. I think the baby knows things are better now, safer." She smiled down at her belly. "I think they approve of you." His expression softened. "I hope to live up to their expectations then." They finished their meal and settled into their evening routine. Quinn banked the fire while Josephine prepared for bed. As she lay in the darkness, she thought about the strange path that had brought her here. If Thomas had not abandoned her, if the town had not cast her out, if Quinn had not found her in the snow, she would be dead now. Instead, she was alive, married, and about to become a mother under the protection of a man who had asked for nothing in return. She heard Quinn settle by the fire, heard his breathing slow as he fell asleep. For the first time in months, she felt truly safe. Whatever the future held, she would face it as Mrs. Montgomery, with a husband who had chosen to stand by her when no one else would. The weeks passed, and winter deepened its grip on Wyoming. The snow piled higher and the temperatures dropped, but inside the cabin there was warmth and an unexpected sense of peace. Josephine grew larger with each passing day, her belly swelling until simple tasks became challenging. Quinn was endlessly patient, helping her with anything that required bending or reaching, never complaining about the extra work. They fell into a comfortable rhythm, working together to keep the household running. She cooked and mended while he tended the animals and maintained the property. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked. She learned about his childhood in Missouri, about his parents and the poverty that had defined his early years. He learned about her life in Illinois, about her mother's death and her decision to trust Thomas, a decision that had led her to this point. "I was so foolish," she said one night, staring into the flames. "I believed everything he told me. I gave up everything for someone who saw me as disposable." "You are not foolish," Quinn said firmly. "You trusted someone you cared about. That is not a weakness, it is part of being human. He was the one who failed, not you. The world does not see it that way. The woman is always blamed. The world is often wrong." He leaned back in his chair. "You are one of the strongest people I have ever met, Josephine. You survived being abandoned, cast out, and nearly freezing to death. You protected your child through all of it. That takes more courage than most people will ever have." His words touched something deep inside her. She had been carrying so much shame and self-blame for months, had internalized the judgment of everyone who had looked at her with disgust. But Quinn saw her differently. He saw strength where others saw sin. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For seeing me as more than my mistakes." He met her eyes across the fire. "We are all more than our mistakes." The conversation shifted to lighter topics after that, but something had changed between them. The connection that had been forming since their first meeting deepened into something more substantial. Josephine found herself looking forward to their evening conversations, to the sound of his voice and the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She caught herself watching him when he worked, admiring the easy strength in his movements and the care he took with the animals. This was not what she had expected when she agreed to marry him. She had thought it would be a cold arrangement, practical and distant. Instead, she was discovering that Quinn Montgomery was a man easy to care for, easy to respect. The seeds of something deeper were taking root in her heart, something that felt dangerously close to real affection. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. But late at night, lying in the bed that smelled like him, she wondered if she was lying to herself. The baby came on a cold February morning when the world outside was white and still. Josephine woke before dawn with a pain low in her back that gradually moved to her belly. She recognized it immediately and called out for Quinn. He was at her side in moments, his hair mussed from sleep and his eyes alert with concern. "Is it time?" "I think so." She gripped his hand as another contraction rolled through her. "We need to get help. The roads are snowed in. I cannot reach town." He looked around the cabin as though searching for answers. "I will have to deliver the baby myself." Fear seized her. "You have delivered a baby before. Cattle and horses, yes, people know, but the principle should be the same." He squeezed her hand. "I will not let anything happen to you or the baby. I promise." The contractions came faster and harder as the morning progressed. Quinn boiled water and gathered clean linens, moving with calm efficiency even though she could see the worry in his eyes. He helped her into position and stayed by her side, encouraging her through each wave of pain. "You are doing so well," he told her, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Just keep breathing. You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." She clung to his words through the endless hours of labor. The pain was overwhelming, worse than anything she could have imagined, but Quinn never left her side. He held her hand when she needed to squeeze something, supported her back when she needed to change positions, spoke to her constantly in that low, steady voice that had become her anchor. As afternoon faded into evening, the baby finally began to crown. Quinn positioned himself to catch the infant, talking her through each push. With one final effort that tore a scream from her throat, the baby slid free into his waiting hands. For a moment, everything was silent. Then a thin wail filled the cabin and Josephine collapsed back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. Quinn wrapped the baby in a clean blanket and laid the tiny bundle on her chest. "You have a son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A beautiful, healthy son." Josephine looked down at the red-faced infant crying against her breast and felt her heart expand until she thought it might burst. He was perfect, absolutely perfect, with a shock of dark hair and tiny fists that waved at the air. She touched his face with trembling fingers, overwhelmed by the love that flooded through her. "Hello, little one," she whispered. "I am your mother. I am here. You are safe." Quinn cut and tied the cord with steady hands, then helped her deliver the afterbirth. He cleaned everything up with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout the birth, then brought her water and helped her get comfortable. Only when she was settled with the baby nursing at her breast did he allow himself to sit down, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. "You did amazing," she told him. "I could not have done this without you. You did all the hard work." He watched mother and baby with an expression of wonder. "What will you name him?" She had been thinking about this for weeks. "I would like to name him Jacob, after my father." "Jacob Montgomery, if that is acceptable to you." "It is more than acceptable." He reached out and gently touched the baby's tiny hand. Jacob's fingers closed around his thumb and held on tight. Quinn smiled, the expression transforming his face. "Hello, Jacob. Welcome to the world." In that moment, watching her husband hold her son with such tenderness, Josephine felt something shift inside her. This was not gratitude she felt anymore. This was not simple appreciation for his help. This was love, real and deep and true. She loved this man who had married her to give her child a name, who had delivered her baby with his own hands, who looked at Jacob as though he already belonged to him completely. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. The weeks after Jacob's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feeding. Josephine recovered slowly from the birth, her body healing even as she adjusted to the demands of motherhood. Quinn took over most of the household tasks without complaint, cooking meals and cleaning while she focused on the baby. He built a cradle from pine wood and carved it with simple designs, creating a safe place for Jacob to sleep. "You did not have to do this," she said, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "I wanted to." He tested the cradle's rockers to make sure they moved smoothly. Every child should have a proper cradle. She watched him with Jacob and saw the bond forming between them. Quinn held the baby often, walking him around the cabin when he fussed, singing old songs in his deep voice until Jacob quieted. He changed diapers without complaint and stayed up with Josephine during the worst of the night feedings, keeping her company in the dark hours. "You are going to make him think you are his real father," she said one night, half joking. Quinn looked up from where he was cradling Jacob against his chest. "I am his real father. I am the one raising him. Blood does not make a parent, love does." The conviction in his voice took her breath away. "You really mean that? Every word?" He looked down at the baby sleeping peacefully in his arms. "I love this boy like he was my own flesh and blood. That will never change, no matter what the future brings." Tears pricked her eyes. "Quinn, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I love you." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Not because you saved me or married me or helped me birth my son. I love you because of who you are, because you are kind and good and honorable, because you see the best in people. Because you make me want to be better than I was." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he carefully laid Jacob in his cradle and crossed to where she sat. He knelt in front of her and took her hands in his. "I love you too," he said softly. I have been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you in that snow, refusing to give up. I married you to protect you and Jacob, but somewhere along the way it became so much more than that. You are my wife in truth now in my heart if you will have me." "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He leaned in and kissed her, and this time there was nothing chaste about it. It was a kiss of passion and promise of two people who had found each other against all odds and chosen to build something real. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard and smiling. "I do not want an annulment," she said. "I do not want a divorce. I want this to be a real marriage in every way. Then that is what we will have." He kissed her again, softer this time. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret this." She cupped his face in her hands. "You saved me in every way a person can be saved." They spent that night talking and kissing, reconnecting as husband and wife in truth rather than convenience. Jacob slept peacefully in his cradle while his parents fell deeper in love, their voices soft in the firelight as they made plans for a future together. Spring came late to Wyoming that year, but when it finally arrived, it transformed the landscape almost overnight. The snow melted and green grass pushed up through the mud. The cattle that had huddled together for warmth during the winter spread out across the range, and Quinn spent long days checking on them and repairing winter damage. Josephine emerged from the cabin with Jacob strapped to her chest in a sling Quinn had fashioned from soft leather. She helped where she could, feeding the chickens they had acquired and tending the small garden they were planting. Jacob grew rapidly, his eyes opening wider each day to take in the world around him. He was a happy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. "He has your eyes," Quinn said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Jacob was in his lap, grabbing at his beard with curious fingers. "I think he has your temperament," Josephine replied. "Patient and steady. Let us hope he gets your brains then. He will need them to make his way in the world." She laughed and leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling content in a way she had never imagined possible. The past felt very far away now, like something that had happened to someone else. Her life was here with Quinn and Jacob, building something lasting and good. In June, they had visitors. A wagon rolled up to the ranch carrying a couple around their age, both looking travel-worn but cheerful. Quinn greeted them warmly and introduced them as his neighbors from the next ranch over, Samuel and Clara Davies. "We heard Quinn had gotten himself married and wanted to meet the new Mrs. Montgomery," Clara said, clasping Josephine's hands. "And you have a baby too. How wonderful." They were invited inside for supper and proved to be pleasant company. Samuel and Quinn discussed ranch business while Clara cooed over Jacob and complimented Josephine on her cooking. As the evening wore on, the conversation turned more personal. "How did you two meet?" Clara asked. "The story going around town is that you courted by letter, but I cannot imagine Quinn writing love letters." Josephine and Quinn exchanged a glance. They had maintained their cover story for months now, but something about Clara's open, friendly face made Josephine want to tell the truth. Quinn gave a small nod, leaving the decision to her. "The truth is a bit different," Josephine said slowly. "I was traveling alone last winter when I was caught in that terrible storm. Quinn found me nearly frozen to death and brought me here. When he learned I was pregnant and had nowhere to go, he offered to marry me to give my baby legitimacy and protection." Clara's eyes widened, but there was no judgment in her expression, only surprise and something like admiration. Samuel leaned forward, interested. "That was a noble thing to do," Samuel said, looking at Quinn with new respect. "It was the right thing to do," Quinn replied simply. "But it turned into something more. We fell in love. This is a real marriage now in every sense." "I can see that," Clara said, smiling at the way they sat close together, the natural ease between them. "You are both fortunate to have found each other, even under unusual circumstances." They talked late into the night, and by the time the Davies left the next morning, Josephine felt she had made true friends. Clara promised to visit often and bring other ranch wives with her, to help Josephine feel less isolated. True to her word, she returned 2 weeks later with 3 other women, all curious but kind. The community that formed around the Montgomery ranch was small but solid. The neighboring families accepted Josephine and Quinn without question, and if anyone suspected that Jacob was not Quinn's biological child, they had the grace not to mention it. Josephine found herself part of a network of women who helped each other through the challenges of ranch life, sharing recipes and remedies and stories. Life settled into a comfortable pattern. Quinn's ranch prospered, his cattle herd growing, and his reputation as a horseman spreading. He took on work breaking horses for other ranchers, bringing in extra income that allowed them to make improvements to the property. They added a second room to the cabin, giving Jacob his own space as he grew. They bought more chickens and a milk cow, increasing their self-sufficiency. Jacob took his first steps in the autumn, right before his first birthday. Quinn was in the barn when it happened, and Josephine ran to get him, excitement written all over her face. They both watched as Jacob tottered across the cabin floor, his face scrunched in concentration, before falling into Quinn's waiting arms. "That is my boy," Quinn said, lifting him high. "Look at you walking already. Soon you will be running everywhere and driving your mother crazy." Josephine laughed, her heart full to bursting. This was her family, her real family, built not from blood but from choice and love. She watched Quinn play with Jacob and thought about how far they had all come from that terrible day in the snow. That night, after Jacob was asleep in his room, Quinn pulled Josephine close as they lay in bed. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" "About giving Jacob brothers and sisters. If you want them, that is. I know the birth was hard on you." She turned to face him, seeing the hope and uncertainty in his eyes. "I would love more children. I want Jacob to have siblings to grow up with. I want to fill this house with our family." "Our family," he repeated, smiling. "I like the sound of that." She kissed him deeply, and their conversation ended as they showed each other without words how much they wanted to build that future together. The seasons turned, and life continued its steady rhythm. Josephine discovered she was pregnant again in the spring of Jacob's second year. This time there was no fear or shame, only joy and anticipation. Quinn was beside himself with excitement, already planning how to expand the cabin again to accommodate another child. The pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because she was not carrying the weight of abandonment and uncertainty. She felt safe and loved, surrounded by a community of friends and a husband who treated her like she was the most precious thing in his world. When the birth came in December, Clara and 2 other ranch wives were there to help, with Quinn pacing anxiously outside until he heard the baby's first cry. This time it was a girl, small and delicate with a cap of blonde hair. They named her Rose, and Quinn wept when he held her for the first time, overcome with emotion at this daughter who was truly his from the start. "She is perfect," he whispered, touching her tiny nose. "Absolutely perfect." Jacob, now a curious toddler, was fascinated by his new sister. He wanted to hold her constantly and bring her his toys, convinced she would want to play even though she was just days old. Quinn patiently explained that Rose needed time to grow before she could play, but Jacob could help by being gentle and singing to her. The cabin that had once seemed spacious now felt crowded with 2 children, so Quinn began building a larger house during the spring. He worked on it between ranch duties, and Samuel and other neighbors came to help when they could. It rose slowly, a proper two-story house with multiple bedrooms and a large kitchen. By summer it was finished, and they moved their belongings with celebration and relief. "A real house," Josephine said, standing in the kitchen and looking around at the space. "I never thought I would have something like this." "You deserve this and more," Quinn said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You deserve every good thing life can offer." She leaned back against him, watching through the window as Jacob played in the yard, chasing chickens and laughing. Rose was napping in her cradle upstairs. "I have everything I need right here." The years flowed past like water. Jacob grew tall and strong, following Quinn everywhere and learning the ways of ranching. Rose proved to be bright and willful, keeping Josephine on her toes with constant questions and boundless energy. They added a third child, another boy they named Thomas after Josephine's grandfather, and then a fourth, a girl named Sarah. The ranch prospered under Quinn's careful management. He became known throughout the territory as an honest man and skilled rancher, someone whose word could be trusted. Josephine managed the household and took over the ranch bookkeeping, discovering she had a head for numbers. Together they built something substantial, a legacy to pass down to their children. There were hard times too. A drought one summer that killed some of their cattle. A winter so harsh that they nearly ran out of supplies. The everyday struggles of raising children and maintaining a working ranch. But they faced everything together, their bond growing stronger with each challenge overcome. On a warm evening in late summer, when Jacob was 10 and Rose was 8, and the younger children were playing in the yard, Josephine and Quinn sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset. He held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in the absent way he had developed over years of marriage. "You ever think about that day I found you in the snow?" he asked. "Sometimes." She squeezed his hand. "I think about how different my life would be if you had ridden a different path that day. Jacob and I would have died out there. I think about it too. I think about how close I came to missing you entirely. If I had left an hour later or taken the shortcut through the valley instead of the ridge, I never would have seen you." He turned to look at her. "My whole life would have been different. No you, no children, just me alone in that cabin. We were meant to find each other," she said. "I truly believe that. So do I." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it. "I love you, Josephine Montgomery. I have loved you since the day I pulled you out of that snowbank and you looked at me like I was your salvation. I will love you until my last breath." Tears sparkled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "I love you too. You gave me everything. A name, a home, a family. You gave me a life worth living when I thought I had nothing left. You gave me just as much. You filled my house with laughter and love. You made me a father and a husband in truth. You showed me that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Inside the house, they could hear the children beginning to argue about something, their voices rising in typical sibling fashion. Quinn started to get up, but Josephine held him back. "Let them work it out," she said. "They need to learn." He settled back down, pulling her close against his side. She fit there perfectly, as she always had. Jacob came running around the corner of the house, being chased by Rose, who was waving a stick and shouting about something he had taken. The younger children followed, screaming with laughter. "They are going to destroy each other," Quinn observed mildly. "Probably, but they will be fine." Jacob spotted his parents on the porch and changed direction, running up the steps with Rose close behind. "Papa, tell Rose that I did not steal her ribbon. I saw him take it," Rose protested. "Did you take her ribbon?" Quinn asked Jacob seriously. Maybe. But only because she took my lucky rock. I found that rock fair and square. Josephine stood and ushered both children inside. Enough. Jacob, give Rose back her ribbon. Rose, give Jacob back his rock, and both of you need to wash up for supper. They went, still arguing but complying with her instructions. Thomas and Sarah tumbled up the steps next, covered in dirt and grinning. Josephine sighed and pointed them toward the water pump. You too, as well. Clean hands before you come inside. Quinn came up behind her and slipped his arms around her waist. This is chaos. This is family, she corrected, leaning back against him. Same thing. But he was smiling as he said it. They went inside together to supervise supper and bedtime, the evening routine they had performed hundreds of times. But it never felt routine to Josephine. Every moment with her family felt precious, a gift she had nearly missed out on entirely. Later, when all the children were finally asleep and the house was quiet, she and Quinn sat by the fireplace in their bedroom. He was carving a toy horse for Thomas while she mended one of Rose's dresses. The comfortable silence between them was the silence of two people who had shared a life, who knew each other's rhythms and moods without needing words. Quinn, she said softly. Yes, thank you. He looked up from his carving. For what? For everything. For finding me, for saving me. For loving me. For being the father my children needed. For building this life with me. She set down her mending. For saying that Jacob deserved your name too, that changed everything. He put down his carving and crossed to her chair, kneeling in front of her as he had that night so many years ago when they first confessed their love. I should be thanking you. You took a chance on a stranger. You trusted me with your heart and your child. You made me a better man than I was. She cupped his face in her hands, seeing the silver beginning to thread through his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes that came from years of work and laughter. He was even more handsome to her now than he had been that first day, his face marked by the life they had lived together. We saved each other, she said. We did. He kissed her, slow and sweet. And I would do it all over again, every single day. The years continued to pass. Jacob grew into a fine young man, strong and capable, with his mother's quick mind and his father's steady nature. When he turned 18, Quinn gave him a section of the ranch to manage on his own, teaching him the business so he would be prepared to take over someday. Rose proved to be as skilled with horses as her father, developing a gentle touch that could calm even the wildest animals. Thomas wanted to be a lawyer, devouring every book he could get his hands on, and Sarah showed talent for drawing and art. The house that had once seemed so large began to feel small again as the children grew. More rooms were added, a workshop for Quinn and a studio for Sarah. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the region. Quinn and Josephine were pillars of the community, respected and well-liked. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Quinn surprised Josephine by taking her to Denver for a week, leaving the children in Jacob's capable hands. It was the first time they had been alone together in years, and they reveled in the freedom. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at restaurants, and walked through the city hand in hand like young sweethearts. I feel like a girl again, Josephine laughed as they strolled through a park. No children demanding my attention, no meals to cook, no clothes to mend. You are still as beautiful as the day I married you, Quinn said. More so, even. Age has only made you more lovely. You are a shameless flatterer. I am an honest man. He pulled her close and kissed her right there in public, not caring who saw. On their last night in Denver, they dressed in their finest clothes and went to a theater to see a play. Josephine wore a dress of deep blue silk that Quinn had bought for her, and she felt like a queen. As they sat in their seats watching the performance, She reflected on how far they had come from that cabin in the wilderness. "What are you thinking about?" Quinn whispered during intermission. "About how grateful I am. For you, for our life together, for everything we have built." She squeezed his hand. "I never imagined I could be this happy." "Neither did I." He raised her hand to his lips. "You are my greatest adventure, Josephine Montgomery. The best decision I ever made was pulling you out of that snow." They returned home to find the ranch running smoothly, and the children excited to see them. Life resumed its normal pace, but something had shifted. The time alone had reminded them of who they were beyond parents and ranchers, had reconnected them to the core of their relationship. They made more time for each other after that, stealing moments alone when they could. Jacob married at 21, bringing home a sweet girl named Emma from a neighboring ranch. They built a house on their section of the Montgomery land, and soon added a grandchild, making Quinn and Josephine giddy with joy. Rose announced she had no intention of marrying, preferring to work with the horses, though Josephine suspected that would change when the right person came along. Thomas left for law school in San Francisco, writing long letters home about his studies. Sarah continued to develop her artistic talents, selling paintings to people throughout the territory. The ranch employed several hands now, and Quinn spent less time doing physical labor and more time managing the operation. His hair turned silver and his face weathered, but he remained strong and active. Josephine's dark hair developed white streaks and lines appeared around her eyes and mouth, but Quinn told her constantly that she grew more beautiful with each passing year. They sat on their porch one evening, grandchildren playing in the yard under Jacob and Emma's watchful eyes. The sun was setting in a blaze of color, painting the Wyoming landscape in gold and crimson. Quinn held Josephine's hand as he did every evening and watched their legacy play out before them. "We did good," he said quietly. "We did very good." She rested her head on his shoulder. From one woman alone in the snow to all of this, it seems impossible sometimes. Nothing is impossible when you have the right partner. He kissed the top of her head. "I would live through it all again, every hardship and struggle just to end up right here with you. Even the time the barn burned down, even then. The drought of '89, that too. When Jacob broke his arm trying to ride that wild Mustang against your advice," Quinn groaned. "Well, maybe I would give him better advice that time, but yes, even that." She laughed and lifted her face for a kiss. He obliged, still able to make her heart flutter after more than 30 years of marriage. Their grandchildren ran shrieking past, playing some elaborate game only they understood. Jacob called to them to be careful, and Emma laughed at something one of them said. "This is everything I never knew I wanted," Josephine said softly. "A family, a home, a love that lasts. You gave me all of it. We gave it to each other." Quinn squeezed her hand. "That is how the best partnerships work. Both people giving, both people receiving, neither keeping score." As darkness fell, they went inside to have supper with Jacob's family. The table was crowded and loud, full of laughter and stories. Josephine looked around at the faces she loved and felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life, this abundance of love and family. It had all started with one act of kindness from a stranger in a snowstorm, one man who had looked at a pregnant woman in desperate need and chosen to help rather than turn away. That night, as they prepared for bed, Quinn pulled out a small wooden box from his dresser drawer. "I made something for you." Inside was a carved wooden heart, polished to a shine. On one side it said Josephine and on the other Quinn, with their wedding date below. In the center, their children's names were inscribed in delicate script. "This is beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth wood. When did you make this? I have been working on it for months. I wanted you to have something that represented us, our family, everything we have built together. He took it from her and held it up to the lamplight. This is my heart, carved in wood. It belongs to you as it has since the day I found you. She threw her arms around him, holding him tight. I love you so much, more than words can ever express. I love you too, always and forever. They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity. Two bodies that knew each other intimately. Two souls that had been intertwined for decades. Afterwards, lying in his arms, Josephine reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. If someone had told her, that day she collapsed in the snow, that she would end up here, she never would have believed them. The idea that the desperate pregnant woman had a future filled with love and family and prosperity would have seemed like a cruel joke, but it had all come true. Quinn had not just saved her life that day. He had given her a reason to live, had shown her that she was worthy of love and happiness despite her mistakes. He had claimed her child as his own and loved that boy with the fierce devotion of any biological father. He had built a family with her, created a legacy that would last long after they were gone. What are you thinking about? Quinn murmured sleepily. About how much I love our life, about how grateful I am for every moment we have had together. She kissed his chest. About how lucky I am that you were riding that ridge the day the storm hit. Luck had nothing to do with it. We were meant to find each other. His arms tightened around her. In any lifetime, in any circumstances, I would have found you. You are my destiny, Josephine. She smiled in the darkness, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. They were destiny, two souls that had found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build something beautiful. The child she had carried through that terrible storm was now a man with children of his own, and the stranger who had offered his name had become the love of her life. The seasons continued their endless cycle. Spring brought new calves and foals. Summer saw the grass grow tall and green. Autumn painted the landscape in gold and orange, and winter blanketed everything in snow. The Montgomery ranch thrived through it all, a testament to hard work and good management. More grandchildren arrived, filling the house with noise and joy. Rose eventually did marry, to everyone's surprise, bringing home a quiet rancher named Peter who she met while selling horses in Cheyenne. Thomas finished law school and opened a practice in Denver, but visited often with his wife and children. Sarah's paintings began to attract attention beyond Wyoming, and she held exhibitions in Denver and San Francisco. Through it all, Quinn and Josephine remained the steady center, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They worked together, played together, faced challenges together. Their love, which had started as a practical arrangement and grown into something real, only deepened with time. They knew each other's thoughts before they were spoken, could communicate with a glance across a crowded room, found comfort in simple proximity after years of partnership. On a winter evening, when Quinn was 60 and Josephine 57, they sat by the fire in their bedroom much as they had countless times before. Snow was falling outside, soft and steady, covering the world in white. Quinn was reading while Josephine worked on a quilt for their newest grandchild. The peaceful silence was broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional turn of a page. "You remember the first time we sat like this?" Quinn asked suddenly. "The night we met." Josephine smiled at the memory. "I was terrified and trying not to show it. You were so kind, so careful to make me feel safe. I was terrified too. I had no idea what I was doing, bringing home a pregnant woman in the middle of a blizzard. I just knew I could not leave you out there to die. And then you offered to marry me." She shook her head in wonder. "I still cannot believe you did that. A complete stranger, and you were willing to give up your freedom to protect my child. Our child, he corrected gently. Jacob has been ours from the moment I held him while he took his first breath. Biology means nothing compared to love. Our child, she agreed. Just like Rose and Thomas and Sarah are ours. Just like all those grandchildren running around are ours. This whole beautiful, chaotic family is ours, built from that one moment of kindness in the snow. Quinn set down his book and crossed to her chair. He took the quilt from her hands and pulled her to her feet, wrapping his arms around her. They swayed together in front of the fire, dancing to music only they could hear. I would do it all again, he whispered into her hair. Every single moment, good and bad, just to have this life with you. So would I. She rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. You are the best man I have ever known, Quinn Montgomery. You saved me in every way a person can be saved, and then you loved me even when I did not think I deserved love. You have always deserved love. You just needed someone to show you that. They continued to sway. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. Outside, the snow fell steadily, just as it had that night so long ago when their story began. But this time, Josephine was warm and safe, surrounded by love and family, secure in the knowledge that she would never be alone in the snow again. The years flowed on like a river, steady and sure. Quinn and Josephine grew old together, their hair turning white and their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminishing. They watched their children and grandchildren thrive, saw the ranch continue to prosper under Jacob's management, took pride in everything their family accomplished. They were in their 70s when Quinn fell ill one winter. It started as a cough that would not go away and progressed into something more serious. The doctor came from town and shook his head gravely, telling them that Quinn's heart was failing and there was nothing to be done. He had months, maybe a year if he was lucky. Josephine refused to accept it at first, insisting there had to be something they could do. But Quinn took her hand and smiled, that same gentle smile that had comforted her through so many difficulties. We have had a good life, he said. Better than good. We have had more happiness than most people ever dream of. I am not afraid. I am afraid, she admitted, tears streaming down her face. I do not know how to exist without you. You have been my partner, my best friend, my everything for over 40 years. How am I supposed to go on alone? You are the strongest person I know. You will manage because that is what you do. You survive. You persevere. You find a way. He wiped her tears with his thumb. And you will not be alone. You have our children, our grandchildren, all the people who love you. They will take care of you. It is not the same. They are not you. No, they are not. But they are part of us, part of what we built together. Our love lives on in them. He pulled her close. I need you to promise me something. Anything? Promise me you will keep living after I am gone. Really living, not just existing. Promise me you will find joy and purpose. Promise me you will not give up. She wanted to refuse, wanted to rail against the injustice of losing him after they had overcome so much. But she looked into his eyes and saw the earnest plea there, and she could not deny him anything. I promise, she whispered. He lived for 8 more months, long enough to see another spring come to Wyoming. The family rallied around him, everyone coming home to spend time while they still could. Jacob and Emma moved into the main house to help care for him. Rose came with Peter and their children. Thomas traveled from Denver with his family. Sarah arrived from San Francisco, where she had been preparing for another exhibition. The house was full of life and love, exactly as Quinn had always wanted. He held court from his bed, telling stories to his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, dispensing wisdom and jokes in equal measure. On good days, He sat on the porch and watched the ranch operations, offering advice when asked but mostly just enjoying being part of the rhythm of life. Josephine never left his side for long. She sat with him during the day, read to him, talked to him about their life together. At night, she climbed into bed beside him and held his hand, sometimes sleeping and sometimes just lying awake listening to him breathe. On a warm May evening, with the windows open to let in the spring breeze, Quinn gathered his family around him. He was visibly weaker now, his breathing labored and his skin pale, but his eyes were clear and full of love as he looked at each face. "I want you all to know how proud I am of you," he said, his voice thin but steady. "You have grown into fine people, every one of you. You have built good lives and raised good families. You have honored your mother and me with the choices you have made." "Papa, do not talk like this," Rose said, tears in her eyes. "You are going to be fine." "We both know that is not true, sweetheart," he smiled at her gently, "and that is okay. I have lived a full life. I have no regrets." He spoke to each of his children individually, giving them final words of wisdom and love. Then he asked for some time alone with Josephine. The family filed out reluctantly, leaving them together in the bedroom they had shared for so many years. "Come here," Quinn said, patting the bed beside him. Josephine lay down next to him, fitting herself against his side as she had done thousands of times before. He wrapped his arm around her, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to the irregular beat of his failing heart. "I love you," he said softly. "I have loved you from the first moment I saw you, and I will love you beyond death. Nothing can change that. I love you too, so much it feels like my heart might break from it." She was crying now, unable to hold back the tears any longer. "I do not want to let you go, I know. But you have to, not today, but soon. And when that time comes, I need you to remember your promise. Keep living. Keep finding joy. Our love does not end just because I do." They lay together as the sun set and darkness fell, holding each other close. Josephine memorized everything about this moment. The feel of his body against hers, the sound of his breathing, the smell of his skin. She wanted to capture it all, to keep it locked in her heart forever. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life. Thank you for letting me love you. You have been my greatest blessing, Josephine, the best thing that ever happened to me." He died 3 days later, peacefully in his sleep with Josephine holding his hand. She woke at dawn to find him still and silent beside her, his face peaceful. She did not cry at first, just lay there holding him, not ready to let go. Eventually, Jacob came in and gently helped her from the bed, wrapping her in his strong arms as she finally broke down. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Wyoming. Quinn had been well loved and respected throughout the territory, and people came from miles around to pay their respects. The church was packed, with many people standing outside unable to fit inside. Person after person spoke about Quinn's kindness, his integrity, his generosity. Josephine listened to it all and felt proud through her grief. This was the man she had loved, the man who had chosen her and built a life with her. His legacy would live on in the people he had touched. The weeks after Quinn's death were the hardest of Josephine's life. She had survived abandonment, poverty, near death, childbirth, and countless other challenges, but nothing prepared her for the emptiness of life without her partner. She moved through her days mechanically, doing what needed to be done but finding no joy in any of it. Her children tried to help, offering to have her come live with them. But she refused, clinging to the house she and Quinn had built together. Being there, surrounded by his things and memories of their life, was both painful and comforting. She could still feel his presence in every room, still hear his voice in her mind. Slowly, painfully, she began to heal. She remembered her promise to keep living, and she honored it even though it was hard. She found purpose in her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, spending time teaching them skills and telling them stories about their grandfather. She worked on quilts and tended her garden. She helped Jacob manage the ranch accounts, putting her head for numbers to good use. On the anniversary of Quinn's death, she climbed the hill behind the house where he was buried. She had visited the grave countless times over the past year, but this time felt different. She stood looking down at the headstone that marked his final resting place and felt something shift inside her. "I kept my promise," she told him. "I am still here, still living. It has been hard without you, but I am managing. The children are doing well. The ranch is thriving. Your legacy lives on in so many ways." The wind rustled through the grass, almost like an answer. Josephine smiled through her tears and placed fresh flowers on the grave. "I miss you every single day. I still reach for you in the night and feel the loss all over again when I remember you are gone. But I am grateful too. Grateful for every moment we had together, every memory we made. You gave me 43 years of love and happiness. That is more than many people get in a lifetime." She stood there for a long time, talking to him about everything and nothing, feeling closer to him than she had since his death. When she finally turned to go back down the hill, she felt lighter somehow, as though sharing with him had lifted some of the weight from her heart. Josephine lived for 15 more years after Quinn's death, long enough to see great-great-grandchildren born and the ranch pass fully into the third generation. She remained sharp and active until the end, beloved by her enormous family. When she finally died at the age of 92, peacefully in her sleep, the family gathered to mourn but also to celebrate a life well lived. They buried her next to Quinn on the hill, their headstones side by side. The inscription on her stone read, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother." She was found in the snow and given a name. She built a legacy of love. The Montgomery Ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations. The story of Quinn and Josephine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. How a cowboy found a pregnant woman dying in a snowstorm and offered to marry her to give her child his name. How that practical arrangement transformed into one of the greatest love stories anyone had ever known. How they built an empire from nothing. How they raised their family with love and wisdom. How they showed everyone around them what true partnership looked like. Jacob lived to be 88, managing the ranch until his own son took over. He never forgot the sacrifice his father had made in claiming him as his own, and he made sure every one of his descendants knew the story. Rose lived into her 90s, still working with horses until her body finally gave out. Thomas became a renowned lawyer and eventually a judge, known for his fairness and compassion. Sarah's paintings hung in galleries across the country, her art celebrated long after her death. The house Quinn built still stood more than a century later, carefully maintained by each generation. People came from all over to hear the story of the Montgomerys, to walk the land where one of the West's greatest love stories had unfolded. The legacy of kindness and love that Quinn and Josephine had established continued to ripple outward, touching lives they would never know. And on winter evenings when the snow fell soft and steady over Wyoming, when the wind howled and the world turned white, some people swore they could see two figures on the hill where the old headstone stood. A man and a woman, holding hands and looking out over the ranch they had built together, their love transcending even death to remain woven into the very fabric of the land they had cherished. It all started with one act of kindness, one cowboy who looked at a desperate woman and chose compassion over convenience, who said those words that changed everything. "That child deserves my name too." From that moment, A legacy was born that would last forever, a testament to the power of love, the importance of second chances, and the incredible things that can happen when someone chooses to see the humanity in another person's suffering. The Montgomery Ranch stands still, a living monument to Quinn and Josephine, to the family they built and the love they shared. Their story reminds everyone who hears it that sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, that love can be found in the darkest moments, and that one person's choice to show kindness can echo through generations, changing not just one life but countless lives to come.